Welcome to SR Studios Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Sarah Walker, whose story, All the Things That Fill Me Up, is featured in the spring 2024 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Sarah Walker is from Northeast Pennsylvania, now living in Greater Boston. She was the 2017 Dennis Lehane Fiction Fellow at the Solstice MFA Creative Writing Program. Her work has appeared in Bull, Carolina Quarterly, Cleaver, Colorado Review, and Cutbank, among others. She was a finalist for the 2022 Robert Day Fiction Award and the 2023 Iron Horse Long Story Prize, and a semifinalist for the 2023 Story Foundation Prize. Her fiction has been supported by the Tin House Workshop and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. She's at work on her first novel and story collection. Sarah, welcome to Inside the Issue.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. I appreciate you making the time. All right, so can you tell us? Actually, would you mind reading a little bit from All the Things That Fill Me Up? Give us a taste of how it's supposed to sound.
Yeah, sure. So I'll read from the beginning. So you don't need to know anything for now, but here we go. All the things that fill me up. We had our worst fight on the hottest day in June. For a week, Kevin and I listened to the news predict record-breaking temperatures. 100 degrees that Friday, 3 weeks before summer officially began. I came home from teaching preschool and Kevin asked about my day. I looked at the dishes piled on the counter and my reply was a sharp snap. It was fine, like every other day. The AC in the preschool in our apartment had not been turned on. My skin felt sticky, my insides dry. I asked Kevin if he had started cooking dinner. I didn't wait for his reply before I asked if he folded the laundry. He worked from home for a startup tech company in Boston. 5 years together, and I still had no idea what work looked like for him. When I acted irritable like this, he accused me of being miserable teaching, afraid to challenge myself and try something new. I had been there for 6 years, since we graduated college, and in his eyes, I was the kind of wife who took everything out on him. Our arguments were so loud, sometimes the downstairs neighbor took a broom to their ceiling. As the heat rose from the apartment below and into ours, Kevin started in on my lack of motivation to be happy, and I threw the glass of water in my hand at his head. It broke against the cabinet and shattered on the floor. Water dripped from his chin. I lunged for him, apologizing, blaming the heat. He stepped back, hands held in front of his face, then left the apartment so I could reflect alone.
All right, thank you. That's a great opening. We get this heated exchange right away, and we have a narrator doing something that feels, I don't know, kind of shocking, right, to admit that to lash out like this. So I think that's a really strong opening, as all great stories are, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what the story is, kind of what's going on in the story and what's it about?
Yeah, so this story is about a woman, Caroline. I actually don't know if her name is mentioned at all in this story, but she does have a name. She is married, newly married, and the relationship, as you see from the first page, is a little rocky, but not for any reason that's really concrete, maybe other than the gender roles, if you will, are a little bit reversed, where he is working, but he's working at home, but he's not helping out. But yet she's stuck in her life and definitely taking out her aggravation on the way her life has become on him. So as the story progresses, soon after that, Kevin suggests that they start opening up their marriage to just sort of help them through these arguments and these problems. This comes as a complete shock to her, and in order to kind of just decompress and forget about her marital issues, she starts swimming at a state reservation, which is Walden Pond, a pretty famous place for a lot of literary folk. And while she's there, she really just appreciates the outdoors. It does allow her to decompress. She meets somebody there that calls himself the mayor of Walden, and really it's just a local person who swims there. And he starts giving her lessons. The story progresses, and she finds out she's pregnant with her husband's child. And this is sort of the normal thing that happens when people, I shouldn't say normal, but normal for a lot of people. You get married, you become pregnant. she is mortified by this, because in the background, the marriage is sort of crumbling. Yet she doesn't want to deal with that fact. Um, and then from there, another turn of events. There's someone missing at the pond, so they can't swim there for a few days, which is something that does happen at a lot of state reservations where swimming is allowed. Um, people just aren't safe, and so this is something that does happen. And from there, she's not really sure. She's kind of paranoid that it is this man that she met. That's the relationship is entirely friendly, but she's worried that without the swimming, without him teaching, where will she go for that little bit of happiness? Um, and I think that doesn't sum up the story, but
No,
pretty
that's great.
much.
Yeah, I think what's really cool, I think I love the way you handle the relationship between Caroline and Pete, the mayor of Walden, the older man she meets swimming, because initially, he's described in a way that, he seems to be attractive, at least to Caroline, if not sort of like striking for a man of his age, and he's very, very fit. And I think I really like the way that you navigate that, because it's kind of a charged relationship, and but it never, like, you never take the easy way out, right, in the story, and have them like hook up or something, or do something that crosses some line, and he's fatherly sort of, but also not. I don't know. I just think that's really well played, that relationship, because it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't go the way that we are hoping it doesn't, right, as readers, like, there is an alternate version of this story where that happens, and maybe it could really work. But I was excited to see that relationship remain like tense and charged, but in a good way.
Right.
I also, like, there's the really funny line to me. I don't know if it's meant to be funny, but I laughed. It's in the line where it's in the I'm sorry, the section where uh Caroline and Kevin are in bed, and she's telling him her plan to start swimming, and that's going to be this thing. She says, I can decompress, and it'll help with my stress, and it'll be good, be healthy and good for us, and all of that. And then he's like, well, I'm thinking about something too. And that's where he pitches the idea of opening the marriage up. But the funny line to me is, I was reading this article online, the Washington Post, I think. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it's like, of course you would be like, well, no, this wasn't my idea. This is like the Washington Post. I mean, I don't
Right.
know why, but that just struck me as I don't know. I love that. It just seemed very like that's exactly what it struck me as, exactly what a guy would try to do. You're gonna be
Right.
like, well, I don't want to do this. It's not me. It's
Yeah, it's other people, so we would be following the
yeah, and
example.
it's the Washington Post, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was really funny. I don't know if that was the intent or not, but I laughed.
Yeah.
um,
No, definitely. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because with this story, I never wanted to do what was obvious.
mhm,
So with, it's like here is a woman who, I mean, she doesn't think she's attractive, but perhaps to other people she is. Um, her husband's the one that suggests bringing opening up the marriage, but he doesn't seem to leave the house where she does. So it's could be easy for her, and she might find something beneficial for herself in that, or
mhm,
ending the marriage in general. um so I wanted that push and pull, and like, oh, the obvious might be happening, but of course it's not going to happen, because for me that's not amusing as a writer,
mhm.
to write the obvious. So yeah.
So where can you talk a little about the genesis of this story? Like, what was the spark for it, or how it developed?
Yeah, so I started working close to Walden Pond, not at the state reservation, but close to it. So I'd pass it on my way home. And there was one week that they had to shut down the pond because someone was missing. And this really rattled the community. Obviously, this was very troubling, very sad circumstance. And I just couldn't, as a writer, I couldn't get this out of my head. Like, what do you mean someone is missing? And they had, this diving team there. Um, and I never write stories that are true to my life. but there's always, of course, little snippets like
Mhm.
any writer. So I kept mulling this over. No, 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 I'm not going to write about someone missing in the pond. But then, like all things writers are obsessed with, it ends up it ends up making its way into a story. And how I usually write a story is I have a scene in mind, or I have even a sentence, or just some like really tangible moment that I want to write towards. So in this story, I knew I wanted to write towards that someone was missing. So this story, and we can talk about this, the revision was really challenging because there were so many things going on in the story. Um, and I knew I wanted to write about, again, something that's amusing for me as a reader and a writer is an obvious situation, something quote unquote normal that turns out to be not so normal. So I knew I wanted to write about, a new marriage, and then what could like really just rattle someone, like, why didn't you tell me this? What would be so tragic, for a new couple, that it's not like it's an arranged marriage, they know each other. So it was definitely the writing towards someone missing, and then everything, this world was really built around that. And then, yeah, it just got really complicated. So I started this story in 2019, I think. Um, Started sending it out maybe a couple years after. In sending it out, I got a lot of feedback from journals that were really helpful, that said, we really liked this story. It made it to the final round, but there's so much going on and so many threads that are left, just kind of floating out there. And I was really stubborn about that for maybe another year. And I'm like, nope, nope, I like how it is. And then I showed it to a group of writers, who I worked with at Tin House, that they sort of said the same thing, like, yeah, you need to focus on what are like the three most important threads, and maybe focusing on those. The ending uh, ended with, in a prior draft, Caroline swimming. When she came back, the ranger that she had interacted with throughout the story, who was like not suspicious of her but annoyed with her, like, why are you so adamant about swimming? I told you you can't swim here.
Mhm.
She ends up following her down to the pond and like watching her, and that's how the story ends. So my writing group was like, did she kill Pete? And I'm like, no. So that really made me think that, okay, as much as I like the story and am resistant to change it, because I did like the mysterious nature of the ending. Whereas, like, is it Pete walking back? Who was missing? So I didn't want to lose that, but I understood as a reader that that could be frustrating,
Mhm.
not knowing exactly what happened. Yeah,
Yeah, I like the I'm happy those other places rejected it because that
yeah,
opened up the opportunity for us. But so yeah, about the ending, I like the one of the things I like is that we she thinks she sees Pete, or not thinks. I mean, she sees somebody who believes she's seeing Pete walking, but then he kind of like disappears on a path and she can't really see. Um, and as she's treading water, I don't know, there's this kind of interesting moment with her at the end where I don't know how I would describe what she does. So the last few lines, I squeezed my eyes shut and went underwater, then forced them open, my mouth too, allowing the water to sting, to move in and fill me. My feet touched the rocky bottom and I pushed off, shot out of the water, facing the empty cove where I would soon crawl, dragging my body on land, gasping for air and coughing up the water my lungs refused to hold. I don't know, there's something about that she's maybe it's just the word choice there, that the lungs refuse, right? That she's not, I think it's too reductive to say she's like suicidal or something there, right? But there's just that mystery of like, or almost that sense that she could, if
mm-hmm,
she wanted to, right?
mm-hmm,
And that she's just flirting with this idea. Plus, and it didn't really occur to me until probably way too late, You know, being underwater, opening her eyes and mouth. You know, we have then a baby, right, that is in fluid and in, you know, so I mean, there's those parallels are there, but it's done in a way that it's not obvious, which is like the best way. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I think the ending had a really deft touch. And really that kind of, I guess that dovetails into something I would say about the entire story. And I'll maybe you'll be able to talk about this during, you know, the challenges that the story posed for you, you know, throughout and especially through revision. But really from get go in this story, and that feeling never left. I just felt very assured as I was reading, and I know I'm not the only reader editor that appreciates this, but there's just a feeling, particular stories where I can kind of turn off the critical part of my brain, and I'm like, yep, this person knows what they're doing, and every step of the way, the moments where a lesser story might go a direction like, yeah, I thought it might do that. It never did that. And that just kind of continued to reinforce this feeling of me just being like, I'm here. And
Mhm.
the ending, you know, resonates in the way that we want endings. You know, it has a resolution to the moment, of course, but it resonates the way that of course we want art to resonate. So that feeling for me never left in this story. It was just like all the way through. I was like, yep, I'm completely in. Now how we that's what we're always striving for, of course, but how we get there is possibly a mystery. I don't know. But what as far as like the challenges of the story, and even particularly in revision, what were those and how might that have, I don't know, do you find that um like voice is important to you? Because this is a story where we have this character's voice, and the voice is the thing that I'm sort of drawn to, but it's not, you know, I don't think I would call it like a voice driven story, if that makes sense, where it's like really idiosyncratic, and it doesn't have that. It's just very assured. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I should stop talking. I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah. No, thanks for saying all that. I read for Salamander magazine, so I know exactly what you're talking about when you come across a story that's like it's just easy and you forget that you're, reviewing something. It just
Mhm.
you're just feeling it. And it's so hard to do. And I think a lot of people, maybe when they're sending out stories, they're just not giving things enough time. Like this story, I mean, I have that problem too. I can be really stubborn. I do take my time with stories. I really don't send out stories until I think they're ready. And it's an important part of the process, even to get those rejections and to hear that feedback, because then I did change the story and then I sent it out, again in another batch. Um, but in terms of the problems and how I dealt with them, I mean, so I love a layered story. Um, and sometimes there's a voice or a character that just comes more natural to me when I'm writing. Other times when I want to write specifically about something, I want it to lead up to something. It's a little harder to get that voice. This was one of those stories, and I keep a journal as I write stories, just so I can go back and remember like where it started. So when you asked to do this interview, I was looking back through these journals and I'm laughing because I'm like, oh my gosh, this has been like such a process. And one of the first notes I wrote to myself after the first draft, like Caroline's voice seems like all over the place. Like and this was a first draft. So it was like she seems sure of herself here. She seems or it seems a little like looser in language here. So that was something I really wanted to focus on, like really listening to the page, listening to this, trying to be intuitive in that way, which seems really like hokey, and sometimes I don't appreciate when writers say like, "Oh, it just came to me."
Yeah.
But in a way, it's true, but it's true because you're reading it, you're analyzing it, you're thinking about it, you're writing about the story to yourself.
Mhm.
So that's really how I work through like a lot of those challenges. Also putting it away for a while, taking it back out, reading it out loud. I put my stories through like a narration app that's So like I'll take a walk and listen to the
Hmm.
story being told to me. So that helps in terms of thinking about the character and the voice in general. And another thing I did that was really helpful, I think I'm answering like maybe a question from before, so
That's all
tell
right.
me if I get
No,
back
no,
on
fine.
track. But in terms of revision, sometimes, as I say, it complicates stories way too much. Um, but I always look to the writers I admire most who write complicated stories, and it really gives me like permission to do the same, but also learning from them and literally like taking their stories and picking them apart. So one person I think that does this really well is Jamal Brinkley, in his latest short story collection, Witness. All these really delicate stories that a few of them have a lot of different threads happening throughout. Laura Vandenberg is another one. I started reading Laura when I was just started writing. And as I'm going through my journal writing this story, I wrote a lot about her story called I Looked for You, I Called Your Name, which is also about a newly wed couple. Um, and I hadn't remembered that that story had such an effect on me, but it was like this very assured voice, but also a very layered story. So I literally would like take her story and write down what happens in it so I could see all the complications and see how she successfully did it. Um, yeah, those are some kind of practical things.
No, that's great. I had never thought about, I mean, I read stories out loud and I tell students, they don't listen, I don't think always, but to read their stories out loud because, often our ear is sharper than our eye. And yeah, listening to it. So it's an app that just reads your story.
Yeah, it's like text to talk, it's called. So it's a literally a robot reading the story. Um, but even in that way, it's helpful because the story needs to stand on its own. And if it is a voice driven story, well, you're not getting that person,
Mhm.
reflecting the language or anything. So you really
Yeah, that's a
have
really
to
cool
let it.
idea. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so I mean the idea of layered stories. I haven't read Brinkley's new. It's in the pile. I haven't read the newest collection, but I read his first one. And the Vandenberg, which collection is that story from? Do you remember?
That one is in the Isle of Youth, I think.
Okay.
So
Um, yeah, her stories are layered, and there's like sort of marvel at all the you know things she's got in the air, and she's able to do that.
mhm.
That's not like I tend not to write those kinds of stories, so I sort of marvel at at a story that can keep multiple threads going.
Yeah,
And the thing about your story though, it's like it has a lot going on, but it doesn't, and this is maybe a testament to the story, it doesn't feel like it. Everything moves, right? And it doesn't, I don't remember how long it was in manuscript, but it didn't strike me as a, long story.
yeah,
Um, and not that I mean that's maybe neither here nor there, but you know, generally the more complex the plot or the more complex the scenario or complicated the scenario is, the longer the story might be. But yeah, that's really cool.
yeah,
um and it's interesting to hear too about the voice. Me saying the voice is just like so sort of not simple but so assured and sort of easy, that wasn't the case.
hmm,
It's impossible. It's such a strong voice.
yeah,
um yeah, that's Yeah. So in addition to Brinkley and Vandenberg, are there other writers that you are drawn to, either early on or, writers you return to?
yeah. There's a writer I was in a Bud Smith workshop with, which all the writers were amazing in that workshop. We did it over the pandemic for 3 months. So we just workshop stories. This was after the MFA, so it was kind of a little lost in terms of how do you write good stories after you leave like a cohort of people and mentors who are telling you how to fix your stories.
Mhm.
But there's a writer in that group. Her name is Hallie Hill, and she just came out with a story collection, Good Women. Um, even it was so cool to read the published collection and see a lot of the stories that, well, just some of the stories that we had workshopped in the Bud Smith workshop. She is a perfect example of a very careful writer who pays, extreme attention to the sentence, but there's so much nuance in what's happening in the story, and on the sentence level. Of course, I mean, I think all good writers try for that, try to focus on the sentence, but I have a really difficult time when I'm writing of balancing the goings on in a story. Like, if there's too much there, what do I focus on? What do I cut back? Um, and of course, you don't, it's maybe not obvious in the published stories, the challenges throughout, but first readers will often, tell me this is really ambitious. And I think that that's a good thing, but sometimes it's so ambitious that it's confusing, to first readers, and
Mhm.
that's just part of it. It's a first reader, it's a first draft. But learning from Hallie and other writers of, how to be ambitious without sacrificing anything, but you also don't want to be too obvious and hit the reader over the head with the themes and what you want the focus to be. Um, we were talking before about Kimberly King Parsons. She's another writer that does this so wonderfully. I've read her stories, in her collection, Blacklight, so many times. Like, how does she do this? Let it sink into me. And maybe a little bit of it has, but a great example too of characters that are so alive, that have grit, and stories that are wildly entertaining, and also beautiful and interesting on the sentence level.
Yeah, I don't know. I like that idea of being ambitious in an early draft. I mean, that seems like that could be kind of freeing in a way, right? I mean, it might cause headaches, as you revise, but the idea that you're like, go for it, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, I think this is true. I mean, I tell students this anyway. The idea that it's easier to take things out of a story than to add them in, right? Like, filling your story up with physical details, because you never know what might matter, and then figuring out which ones matter and which ones don't. It's easier to take out. I don't know. I think I find it easier to cut than to find my way back into that space where I've got to, like, I don't know, add to the world or to the complications. So I think being ambitious early on is you know probably the way to be, despite the problems the problems it might cause you in revision.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Parsons' stories, yeah, that collection Blacklight, that's really strong. I really like those stories. um
Mhm.
um So, in addition to, if you have any other writers, are there any other writers that we should be reading? I mean, you give us a great list of people here, and particularly the Hallie Hill. I'm not familiar with that book, so we'll be going on the list. Anybody else that you
By
want to that
City.
you that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, Bud Smith is another one. A really great teacher. Like I said, that workshop, it was a non-academic setting, so I wasn't used to that, but his writing also just, I mean, talk about somebody being ambitious and having fun in their writing. You could so see that on the page. Um, yeah, Jamal Brinkley. Oh, Wells Tower. Have you heard of Wells
Yep.
Tower?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of his stories in the collection, I returned to as an early writer, in his collection. Everything ravaged, everything burned, I think.
Yep.
Kevin Wilson. I love Kevin Wilson. Uh, Great examples of stories that have plot, but don't, but it has to also have the focus on the humane, the literary. Uh, I just love a really entertaining literary story, and I think, yeah, Kevin Wilson does that really well.
Yeah, I not always, but occasionally I'll teach that Wells Tower title story, Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned. It goes over pretty well with students because it's Vikings and stuff, right? But
Yeah.
the voice in that story is the way he manages the, the ancient setting with like the odd contemporary corporate speech. And I think
Yeah.
I don't have it committed to memory, but that the last paragraph of that story is just like gut wrenching.
Mhm.
And the ability to like for that story to be wildly funny, George Saunders-esque funny and absurd, and then to have that just like Saunders have that kind of just that ending where you're I don't know, just struck, emotionally struck. So yeah. All right, great. Thank you for the like I said, you're adding to my list. What are you working on now, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah, so I've been working on a novel for the last couple of years. And I had written a novel right out of my MFA program in 2019. Um, first novel, I thought I liked it, but I think it was just a practice run, as they say. And so now I've since started a new novel. It's been a couple years in. I think I'm on the last draft now, but there never seems to be a last draft. And
Let's
then
hope.
this
Let's hope, right?
story, yeah, yeah, let's hope this is the last draft. All the things that fill me up is part of a story collection that is completed, um, that I'm hoping to kind of pair with my novel if I go on, searching for an agent or something like that. Um, but yeah, I do have a completed story collection that I've been tinkering with for the last couple of years, but more or less that's finished.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think this story. I mean, I don't know any of the other stories that are in it, but it feels like a anchor kind of story. This is a good story.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, does the collection is the story thematically similar to your other work? I know that's kind of a
Yeah.
broad
So
question, but
yeah, I tend to write about characters that are really stuck in place, stuck in life, but to say they're passive is maybe not the correct word. Um, but things are happening around them and they might and they just don't think or don't act on um, they don't act on what could change and make their life for the best. So that's a huge theme in my collection. The collection takes place both in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. I really wanted there to be a theme of rural stories. I grew up in a rural environment. I now live in an urban one. So I really wanted this play of, you know, as for community, what's really different in urban settings and rural settings? How are these people so utterly lonely in both? And what does that say about humanity in general? Um, yeah,
well, that's yeah, that this story definitely tracks with that. I like that idea of these characters who, you know, don't or are unable to act in their own best interest, right? Or make the choices that, could solve some of their problems. But as we
yeah,
know, those are often most, what would be an easy choice. What from the outside seems to be an easy choice isn't.
yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much for thanks for sending us the story and for agreeing, for the talk here. You can find all the things that fill me up in the spring 24 issue of SIR. You can go to usi.edu/SIR to find out how to get a copy. And the link will also be in the description. And thank you again, Sarah. This is great to hear about your work and your thoughts on the story.
Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for accepting it. I'm glad it got those rejections from the first go around. So it's found a good home and I can't
Yeah,
wait
I,
to see it.
I'm their loss is our gain for sure. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. All right, well, we'll see everybody on the next one. Thank you again, Sarah.
Yep, thank you.